Deep in the jungles of Colombia, buried under centuries of vines, mud, and silence, there are entire cities that were never supposed to be found. Stone staircases that climb straight up the sides of mountains. Terraces carved into cliffs so steep that even modern engineers hesitate to work on them. Underground tombs painted with red and black patterns that nobody alive has ever fully decoded. And rows of giant stone figures standing guard over ancient graves, their faces frozen somewhere between human and animal. For hundreds of years, almost nobody knew these places existed. The people who built them disappeared. They left behind no written language, no blueprints, no record of how they hauled stones weighing several tons up mountains with no roads, no wheels, and no metal tools. Today, archaeologists have mapped only a small fraction of what is actually out there. And the deeper they dig, the stranger it gets, because some of these structures line up perfectly with the stars. Some were built directly on top of even older structures, and some raise a question that still does not have a satisfying answer. Who really built them, and how did they know things they were never supposed to know? Before we go any deeper, if lost cities and unexplained ancient architecture fascinate you as much as they fascinate me, take 1 second to subscribe. This channel goes deep on the structure's history forgot, and there is a lot more of this coming. Now let us head into the mountains. Our story starts in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, a mountain range on the northern coast of Colombia that rises almost straight out of the Caribbean Sea. It is one of the highest coastal mountain ranges on the planet, and for most of modern history, the thick jungle covering it kept a secret that would rewrite everything people thought they knew about ancient South America. In 1972, a group of treasure looters were hacking their way through that jungle, following rumors of gold. What they found instead was a set of stone steps. Not a few steps, over 1,000 of them, climbing up into the mist. They followed those steps, and at the top, they found a city. Locals started calling it the Green Hell because of how hard it was to reach. Archaeologists would later name it Teyuna. The rest of the world knows it as Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City. And here is the part that stops people cold. This city was built around the year 800. That makes it roughly 650 years older than Machu Picchu in Peru. While Europe was stumbling through the early Middle Ages, a civilization in the Colombian jungle was engineering a mountain metropolis. The people who built it were the Tairona, and they were not primitive in any sense of the word. Ciudad Perdida was not just a cluster of huts. It was a planned urban center, home to somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 people at its peak. It had a network of stone paths, plazas, drainage canals, retaining walls, and more than 160 circular terraces cut directly into the mountainside. Think about what that actually required. The Tairona had no cranes, no steel, no wheeled carts, and yet they leveled the tops of ridges, reinforced them with stone, and built flat living platforms on a slope where a single mistake means a long fall. Their terraces were engineered to handle one of the wettest climates in the world. When torrential rain hits that mountain, it can wash entire hillsides away. But the Tairona designed their canals and drainage systems so precisely that many of those terraces are still standing and still draining water correctly more than 1,000 years later. Let that compete with modern construction for a second. We build roads that crack in 5 years. They built a mountain city that survived 12 centuries of jungle, earthquakes, and monsoon rain, and it is still holding. And the Tairona were not just builders. They were master goldsmiths. Their metalwork was so advanced that they were mixing gold with copper to create an alloy the Spanish would later call tumbaga, then treating the surface so the finished piece looked like pure gold. They cast intricate figures, pendants, and ornaments using a lost wax technique that requires real metallurgical control. Their society was organized, spiritual, and led in part by priests known as mamos, who trained for years to understand the balance between the community and the natural world. This was a full civilization, with trade routes running from the mountains down to the coast, moving fish, salt, cotton, and gold between settlements linked by those stone highways. But here is where the mystery deepens. The Tairona had no written records. Everything we know about how they lived comes from the stones themselves and from their descendants. So when archaeologists ask the obvious questions, the answers get thin. How did they calculate the load-bearing angles for terraces on unstable slopes? How did they move and shape the flat stone slabs that paved the paths some weighing hundreds of pounds without draft animals. How did they plan a city with proper water management on terrain that modern surveyors need laser equipment to map? Nobody knows exactly, and that is not the last surprise the lost city has to offer, because Ciudad Perdida is not one lost city. It is one of many. Scattered across the Sierra Nevada are the remains of dozens of connected settlements, linked by an ancient network of stone roads and slab-paved highways running for miles through the jungle. Most of them have never been fully excavated. Some have barely been touched, which means the largest secrets of the Tairona are almost certainly still out there, waiting under the green. And that leads to the biggest question of all. What happened to them? We will come back to that. But first, we need to travel south, into the mountains of Huila, to a place that somehow manages to be even stranger than a lost city. This place is called San Agustín, and if the lost city is a mystery of engineering, San Agustín is a mystery of imagination that borders on unsettling. Spread across the rolling green hills of southern Colombia are hundreds of massive stone statues. Not small carvings. Some of these figures stand over 4 meters tall and weigh several tons. There are more than 500 of them documented across the region, making it the largest collection of religious monuments and megalithic sculptures in all of South America. And here is the problem. We have almost no idea who made them. The statues were carved somewhere between the 1st and the 8th century, over a span of hundreds of years. But the people who made them left no name for themselves, no written language, and no clear explanation of what they were doing. They simply vanished long before the first Spanish explorers arrived. By the time Europeans stumbled onto the site in the 1700s, the builders were already ancient history, and the local population had no memory of who had carved the giants standing in their fields. So what do the statues actually show? This is where it gets deeply strange. Many of them depict figures with enormous fanged teeth, almost like a jaguar merged with a human face. Some hold what look like children, or weapons, or ceremonial objects. Some are clearly warriors. Others seem to be gods or spirits. There are creatures that mix eagle, snake, and human features into a single body, which is a pattern you see in shamanic art across the ancient Americas, usually connected to trance states and the belief that a shaman could transform into an animal. The most famous section is a place the site calls the Fuente de Lavapatas. It is a religious monument carved directly into the bed of a stream. The builders shaped the living rock into channels, pools, and a maze of serpents, lizards, salamanders, and human faces, and then let the water flow through all of it. It was almost certainly used for rituals, possibly healing ceremonies or worship tied to water. And it was carved with such control that the water still moves through the carved channels today, exactly as intended, more than 1,000 years later. Now put yourself in the mind of an archaeologist standing there. You have a civilization advanced enough to quarry stone, transport multi-ton blocks across hills, carve them with incredible detail, and engineer flowing water features into solid bedrock. But you have zero written records, zero names, and zero surviving oral history from the actual builders. The statues are talking to us. We just cannot understand the language. And the burial sites raise even more questions. Many of these giant statues were not standing out in the open originally. They were guardians. They were placed at the entrances of tombs and inside earthen burial mounds, watching over the dead. The people of San Agustín built elaborate underground funeral chambers, lined them with stone slabs, and set these feigned stone sentinels to protect whoever was buried inside. But when archaeologists excavated many of the tombs, the bodies and treasures were already gone, lost to time or grave robbers, or something we cannot reconstruct. So even the dead they were protecting have mostly vanished, and the scale of the burial architecture is easy to underestimate until you see it. At sites within the region, like the Alto de los Ídolos and the Alto de las Piedras, the builders raised artificial earthen mounds and then built entire funerary complexes inside and around them. They lined tombs with enormous flat stone slabs, some painted, forming rooms for the dead below the surface. They quarried the raw stone from sources that were not always close by, which means they were dragging multi-ton blocks across uneven terrain, then carving them on site into warriors, gods, and monsters. And they repeated this across a huge area, over many centuries, with a consistent artistic style, which tells us this was an organized society with a shared religion, not a handful of isolated artists working alone. Who were they protecting? Why the jaguar faces? Why carve 500 giants and then disappear so completely that not even a legend survived? The honest answer from modern archaeology is that we are still guessing. But if you think that is the strangest thing hidden in the Colombian mountains, wait until you see what is underground. A short distance from San Agustín, in a region called Tierradentro, there is something that almost nobody outside of archaeology circles has ever heard of, and it might be the most haunting sight on this entire list. On the surface, Tierradentro looks like quiet green farmland dotted with hills, but those hills are hollow. Carved deep into the volcanic rock beneath them are enormous underground tombs, and there is nothing else quite like them anywhere in the Americas. These are not simple holes in the ground. To enter one, you descend a spiral staircase carved directly into the rock, sometimes going 7 or 8 meters straight down into the earth. At the bottom, the space opens up into a large domed chamber, held up by carved stone pillars, big enough to stand and walk around in. And then you look at the walls and the ceiling, and you realize you are surrounded by paintings. The builders covered these underground chambers in geometric designs in red, black, and white. Diamonds, zigzags, human faces, spirals, and repeating patterns that stretch across the ceilings and columns. Some of the designs seem to copy the textiles the people wore. Others may be maps of belief, symbols of a cosmology we can no longer read. Down there, in total darkness, lit only by whatever torch you carry, the effect is overwhelming. It feels like stepping inside the mind of a civilization. These tombs were built roughly between the 6th and the 10th century. They were used for a very specific purpose. First, a person would be buried somewhere else. Later, after the body had decomposed, their remains would be gathered up, placed in large ceramic urns, and moved into these underground chambers for a permanent second burial. In other words, these were not just graves. They were designed as a final resting place for the collected dead of an entire community, an underground city of ancestors. And once again, we hit the same wall. We do not really know who these people were. We do not have their name for themselves. We do not have their writing. We have their extraordinary underground architecture and their haunting painted tombs, and then silence. They too disappeared before recorded history could catch them. Stop and think about the level of skill this required. To carve a domed chamber underground, you have to understand how the rock behaves, dig it wrong, and the ceiling collapses on you. These builders shaped columns, benches, niches, and domes into volcanic tuff, using stone and possibly wooden tools, working in near darkness, underground, with no way to see the whole structure at once. And they did it dozens of times across the region, with enough consistency that we can recognize a clear architectural style. That is not luck. That is engineering knowledge, passed down and refined over generations by people who left no manual behind. So we have a pattern forming here. Across Colombia, again and again, we find advanced builders who left masterpieces of stone and then vanished without a trace of writing. But there is one more site we need to see, because it adds an entirely new dimension to the mystery. Literally, because this one points at the sky. High on a plateau near the town of Villa de Leyva, in the cold highlands where the Muisca people once lived, there is a field of standing stones. The Spanish who found it were so disturbed by it that they gave it a blunt name. They called it El Infiernito, the Little Hell. They assumed anything this strange had to be the work of the devil. What they were actually looking at was one of the oldest astronomical observatories in the Americas. El Infiernito is a Muisca site built to track the sky. It consists of rows of large stone monoliths, some standing several meters tall, arranged in careful lines across the plateau. And these stones were not placed randomly. They were positioned to work as a calendar. By tracking the shadows the stones cast and the points on the horizon where the sun rose and set, the Muisca could identify the equinoxes and solstices. They could tell when the seasons were about to change. They could know exactly when to plant and when to harvest, which for an agricultural society living at high altitude was the difference between survival and starvation. In other words, these people built a giant stone machine for reading time out of sunlight, long before telescopes, long before clocks, using nothing but carefully placed rock and a deep, patient understanding of how the sun moves across the year. And they did something else at El Infiernito that tends to make museum tours a little awkward. Many of the standing stones are large stone phalluses. The site was almost certainly connected to fertility rituals as well as astronomy. Life, death, the harvest, and the heavens, all tied together in one sacred field of stone. To the Muisca, the fertility of the land and the movement of the sun were not separate ideas. They were the same story, and El Infiernito was where that story was written in rock. The Muisca, at least, we know a little more about, because they were still around when the Spanish arrived, and they left behind gold work so refined it inspired the entire legend of El Dorado. But even with them, huge gaps remain. Much of their knowledge, their rituals, and their engineering was deliberately erased during the conquest. What we have left is fragments, a stone calendar here, a golden raft there, and a nagging sense that we are only seeing the surface of what they knew. So let us pull all of this together, because when you line up these 4 sites, a real question emerges that historians genuinely struggle with. How did all of these separate cultures, spread across different regions in different centuries, independently reach such a high level of architecture and engineering, and then vanish so completely? Let us take the engineering question seriously for a moment, because from an architecture standpoint, this is the part that should not be possible. These builders had no iron tools, no steel chisels, no wheels for transport, no draft animals like horses or oxen to haul heavy loads, and in most cases, no written system to record measurements or pass along technical plans. And yet they quarried multi-ton stone. They moved it across mountains and hills. They carved it with enough precision to create flowing water channels and detailed faces. They engineered terraces that survive monsoons, tombs that survive earthquakes, and observatories accurate enough to track the sun across an entire year. Modern engineers with laser levels and hydraulic equipment look at these sites and admit openly that they are not entirely sure how it was done with the tools available at the time. And from a pure architecture and construction standpoint, the terracing at Ciudad Perdida deserves special attention because it is a masterclass in something modern developers spend fortunes trying to solve. Building on a steep slope in a wet climate is one of the hardest challenges in construction. Water wants to pull everything downhill. Soil wants to slide. The Tairona solved it with a layered system of stone retaining walls filled in graded surfaces and stone-lined drainage channels that carried rainwater safely off the platforms instead of letting it undermine the foundations. They effectively built a passive water management system into the bones of the city, with no pumps and no modern hydrology, and it worked so well that the terraces outlasted the empire that built them. If a real estate developer today produced a hillside project that survived 1,000 years of tropical storms with zero maintenance, it would be studied in engineering schools. The Tairona did it 1,000 years ago, and then the knowledge was lost. The mainstream answer is not aliens, and it is not magic. The real answer is arguably more impressive. It is time, memory, and human intelligence. These civilizations accumulated knowledge over dozens of generations, through trial and error, through observation, through skills passed from parent to child by hand and by voice rather than by writing. A master builder trained an apprentice, who trained the next, for hundreds of years. The knowledge lived in people, not in books, which is exactly why it was so fragile, because that is the dark thread connecting all of these places. When the builders disappeared, the knowledge disappeared with them. There was no library to burn, because there was no library. It all lived in human memory, and human memory can be wiped out in a single generation. So what actually happened to them? The answers vary by site, but a few forces show up over and over. Disease is a massive one. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought illnesses that the local populations had never encountered. Smallpox and other diseases swept through communities and killed enormous numbers of people, sometimes before the Spanish even physically reached a given area. Entire knowledge systems collapsed simply because the elders who carried them died too fast to teach anyone. Then there was conquest itself. The Tairona, for example, resisted Spanish control fiercely, and that resistance was met with brutal force. Their society fractured, survivors retreated deeper into the mountains, and the great cities were abandoned to the jungle, swallowed so completely that it took until 1972 for outsiders to rediscover the largest of them. And for the older cultures, like the builders of San Agustín and Tierradentro, they were already gone centuries before the Spanish showed up. Their disappearance is even harder to explain. It may have been climate shift, resource depletion, warfare between groups, or slow migration and cultural change that dissolved the old ways. The truth is, for those two sites, we are honestly not certain. They finished their monuments and then, over time, they simply stopped, and the reason left no clear signature in the ground. There is also a darker, more modern chapter to all of this, and it is worth being honest about. Remember that Ciudad Perdida was rediscovered by looters, not scientists. For years, the site was raided for its gold and its artifacts before archaeologists could properly study it. The same thing happened at San Agustín and Tierradentro, where countless tombs were emptied long before anyone recorded what was inside them. Every stolen artifact is a page torn out of a book we were already struggling to read. When a gold figure or a painted urn is ripped out of its resting place and sold, we do not just lose an object. We lose the context, the position, the story it was telling about the people who made it. So part of the reason these structures feel unexplained is not just that the builders vanished. It is that the evidence that survived them has been quietly disappearing into private collections for a very long time. But here is the thought that stays with me. The descendants of some of these builders are not gone. In the Sierra Nevada, the indigenous peoples known as the Kogi, the Arhuaco, the Wiwa, and the Cancuamo are direct descendants of the Tairona. They still live on those mountains. They still consider Ciudad Perdida and the surrounding peaks to be sacred. And they have watched, for decades, as outsiders treated their ancestors as a puzzle to be solved, while they themselves quietly kept alive fragments of the knowledge and beliefs that built those cities in the first place. The Kogi call themselves the Elder Brothers, and they call the rest of us the Younger Brother. Their view, put simply, is that they never lost the connection to the land and the balance that their ancestors understood, and that the modern world has forgotten something essential. Whether or not you take that literally, there is something humbling in it. The mystery of who built these structures is not entirely a mystery to everyone. To the people still living on those mountains, it is not ancient history. It is family. So what are we really looking at when we stand in front of these Colombian structures? We are looking at proof that human beings, working with almost nothing that we would consider modern technology, built cities in the clouds, giants of stone, painted underworlds, and machines for reading the sun. And we are looking at how quickly all of that can be nearly erased. One wave of disease, one conquest, one or two generations of broken transmission, and 1,000 years of accumulated genius can drop out of the historical record almost entirely. The lost city sat empty in the jungle for 4 centuries before anyone climbed those steps again. The statues of San Agustín stood in silent fields with no one left to explain them. The painted tombs of Tierradentro held their ancestors in the dark, unread. And the stone calendar of El Infiernito kept tracking a sun that its builders were no longer alive to watch. These places are not unexplained because ancient people were mysterious or magical. They are unexplained because we lost the thread. And every year, archaeologists and the descendant communities working alongside them recover a little more of it, one stone, one tomb, one terrace at a time. There is far more of this waiting under the jungle than has ever been dug up, which means the strangest structures hidden in Colombia might be ones that no living person has ever seen. Not yet. And maybe that is the real lesson buried in all of this stone. We tend to assume that progress only moves forward, that each generation knows more than the last, that nothing truly advanced ever gets forgotten. Colombia says otherwise. Here is an entire region where brilliant builders raised cities, carved giants, painted the underworld, and mapped the heavens, and then watched almost all of that knowledge slip away in the space of a few generations. It is a reminder that civilization is not a permanent thing. It has to be carried, taught, and protected, or it is lost. These structures are not just ruins. They are a warning written in rock. If this pulled you in, do yourself a favor and subscribe, because the next lost civilization we explore is one that built something so precise that modern architects still cannot agree on how they pulled it off. You are not going to want to miss it. Trust me, once you see what they built, you will never look at old ruins the same way again. The past is far stranger than school ever taught. See you there. Stay curious.